He was just the mechanic until the day he saved a $65 million jet and exposed a $400 million lie. When Reggie Monroe pulled up in his beat-up pickup truck to the private runway at Clearwater Executive Airfield, the elite executives inside laughed. To them, he didn't look like someone who belonged near a luxury Gulfstream G650, let alone under its hood. But what no one realized was that this so-called grease monkey had designed the very system keeping that jet in the sky. What started as a routine repair turned into a scandal that shattered reputations, dismantled an empire of intellectual theft, and brought one man from the shadows of discrimination to the helm of an aerospace revolution. And when the CEO herself said, "Come with me," she had no idea she was unleashing a war. This isn't just a story about talent overlooked. It's about truth weaponized, justice engineered, and a man who turned silence into strategy. Stick around, because in the next few minutes, you'll witness how one mechanic dismantled an entire legacy of racism and rebuilt it with precision. If this story hits you hard, comment your thoughts, like the video, and subscribe for more real stories where justice takes center stage. The laughter echoed like thunder through the spotless glass of the VIP terminal as Reggie Monroe pulled his weathered 1998 Dodge Ram onto the private runway. His engine sputtered slightly, a fitting sound for a man whom most of Clearwater's elite assumed had wandered into the wrong world. His hands rough, calloused, and stained from decades of labor gripped a battered red toolbox as he stepped onto the tarmac. Through the windows, men in tailored suits exchanged glances laced with disbelief, some even shaking their heads. "Is this the specialist we called for Ms. Lockhart's jet?" sneered Derek Caldwell, director of operations for Lockhart Aviation Group. "I thought we were getting the best in the state, not someone who looks like he fixes mufflers behind a gas station." Reggie heard every word. He didn't flinch. He'd been called worse. Many times. This wasn't new. What they didn't know was that Reggie Monroe had repaired more private jets than the entire airfield staff combined. Over 15 years, he'd earned multiple national awards for aerospace maintenance and technical innovation. But that didn't matter here. Not when you were black. Not when you looked like him. Not when prejudice walked around in shiny shoes. "Ms. Lockhart's G650 needs to be airborne in 2 hours," said the runway supervisor, standing at a cautious distance as if Reggie might stain his uniform. "None of our guys could isolate the problem. If you can't fix it soon, we'll bring in the Atlanta team." The Gulfstream G650 shimmered under the Florida sun like a polished $65 million diamond. Reggie walked toward it, feeling the heat not just from the tarmac, but from the burning stairs behind the terminal glass. He could feel them watching, judging, waiting for him to fail. But then, a voice sliced through the heavy air. "Let him work." The voice was calm, precise, commanding. Savannah Lockhart, CEO of Lockhart Aviation Group, was walking across the tarmac, her navy blue suit sharp against the bright sunlight. At 43, her stride was purposeful, her gaze focused solely on Reggie. She didn't spare a glance at the suits behind the window. "How much time do you need?" she asked. "That depends on the problem, ma'am," Reggie answered, looking her in the eye. "You've got 1 hour," she said, checking her luxury wristwatch worth more than Reggie's annual earnings. "Impress me." As the suited men retreated into air-conditioned comfort, Reggie opened the main access panel on the jet. Within seconds, he saw it, a catastrophic failure in the pressurization system, misdiagnosed by previous technicians as a wiring issue. If this jet took off, the cabin would lose pressure at 45,000 feet. Everyone aboard would be dead in minutes. But Reggie didn't panic. His hands moved with practiced precision. And as he worked, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, eyes watching him not with scorn, but with interest. Through the terminal glass, Savannah Lockhart never looked away. She wasn't judging. She was recognizing. 38 minutes. That's all it took for Reggie Monroe to fix a problem that had stumped 3 certified teams. No fanfare, no applause, just the hiss of hydraulic seals locking back into place and the thud of a toolbox closing. He wiped his hands on a rag so worn it looked like a relic, then stood quietly by his truck, ready to leave. As always, he expected nothing. Praise was a currency he'd never been paid in. But then she stepped out again. Savannah Lockhart didn't bring her team. No entourage. No clipboard. Just her heels striking the tarmac like gavel blows. Her face unreadable. The suited onlookers behind the terminal watched in stunned silence as their CEO walked directly toward the mechanic. How long would it have taken them to find the real issue? She asked flatly. They wouldn't have, Reggie replied without blinking. That jet would have gone down before they figured it out. A pause followed. Thick, heavy, the kind that rewrites relationships. Savannah stared at him, really seeing him now. Then, without breaking eye contact, she said 5 words that sent Derek Caldwell into a tailspin. Come with me. Now. Gasps erupted behind the terminal glass. Derek took a step forward, his mouth twitching with objection, but Savannah raised a single hand. He froze. She turned without explanation and walked briskly toward the main terminal, Reggie at her side. They entered through a biometric door off-limits to most employees and disappeared down a corridor lined with frosted glass and muted whispers. They stopped at a door marked Executive Conference Room A. Inside, the room was a masterpiece of corporate opulence, polished mahogany, brushed steel, and panoramic views of the runway. Savannah gestured toward a chair. Reggie sat, awkwardly, like a mechanic who didn't belong. Savannah circled behind her desk and powered on a sleek tablet. Your full name? She asked, though she already knew it. Reggie Monroe, he answered. Her fingers danced across the screen. Then she stopped. Her eyes widened slightly. Reggie Monroe. RM, she murmured, almost to herself. The initials were familiar. They were etched into the early prototype diagrams of the G7 pressurization system, a multi-million-dollar advancement that powered nearly half the Lockhart fleet. Reggie said nothing, but his hands gripped the chair a little tighter. Savannah looked up. Masters in Aerospace Engineering, Georgia Tech. 3 patents. For innovation awards. Why are you out there fixing jets instead of designing them? His reply was quiet, but steel-edged. Because no one hires a black engineer from the East Side to lead a development team. Mechanics get bills, too, Ms. Lockhart. She leaned back slowly, assessing him again not as a technician, but as something else entirely. A mind. A threat. A key. Then, wordlessly, she opened a drawer and laid a folder on the table. Reggie glanced down. Inside were engineering documents. Project memos. All signed by Derek Caldwell. Every one of them tied to the G7 system. Documents Reggie recognized, because he had written them. Savannah Lockhart didn't say a word as Reggie Monroe flipped through the documents. Blueprints. Design specs. Performance reports. All tied to the G7 pressurization system, Lockhart Aviation's crown jewel. All credited to Derek Caldwell. But the technical language? The margins? The notations? They were Reggie's. And Savannah knew it. She studied him closely, her fingers tapping against the desk. Do you know how much profit the G7 system has generated for Lockhart Aviation in the last 5 years? She asked. Reggie didn't miss a beat. Roughly $428 million, he said. It reduced fuel consumption by 23% and cut maintenance costs by 31%. That's what it was designed to do. Savannah arched an eyebrow, clearly impressed. Derek received 3 promotions and a $2.5 million bonus because of that system, she said coldly. Reggie didn't even flinch. While I kept fixing jets and backlots, he replied. A knock rattled the conference room door. Then, without waiting for permission, Derek Caldwell strode in, face painted with false concern and forced urgency. Savannah, the board is on the line for the quarterly video call. We need to discuss. He froze mid-sentence when he saw Reggie. His gaze sharpened. Why is the technician still here? I assume the service is complete. Savannah didn't even blink. Actually, we're discussing intellectual property, she said smoothly, specifically the G7 system. Derek's face drained several shades paler. I'm not sure what this mechanic could possibly contribute to that conversation, he scoffed. That's interesting, Savannah said, tapping her tablet again. Because I just found out these original designs signed with the initials RM were submitted to our internal database 5 years ago, right before you filed for a patent under your own name. Derek forced a laugh. He was an assistant technician back then. At best, the G7 was developed entirely by my team. Just then, the door creaked open again. A woman in her 50s entered, dressed in a charcoal gray suit and carrying a briefcase thick enough to crush denial. She nodded politely to Reggie, then turned to Savannah. My apologies for the delay, she said crisply. Had to verify the archive logs twice. Derek, this is Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, our chief legal officer, Savannah said. Evelyn set her briefcase down with a soft thud. I've reviewed the digital trail from the internal system, she said calmly, opening a file on her tablet. The metadata confirms it. The original designs, time-stamped and digitally signed, belong to Reginald Monroe. Not you, Derek. Derek blinked hard, as if trying to reset his brain. There must be a mistake. Maybe he made a minor contribution. Minor? Savannah cut in, her voice low and slicing. I have emails from you to HR recommending Reggie's dismissal for technical incompetence, dated exactly 3 days after he submitted those files. Reggie sat still, his face unreadable. Inside, his heart pounded. 5 years ago, he was escorted out of this very building like a criminal. Laughed at. Forgotten. Now, that history was unraveling. And it was just the beginning. The room had gone silent. Derek Caldwell stood like a statue, trying to recover his crumbling confidence. Savannah Lockhart leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. Across from her, Reggie Monroe looked calm, almost too calm. It wasn't the look of a man getting justice. It was the look of a man who had planned for it. Savannah broke the silence. Mr. Monroe, she said, her tone suddenly measured. Dr. Rhodes and I have a proposal for you. What kind of proposal? Reggie asked, his voice steady, but eyes alert. One that makes history, she replied. Retroactive recognition of your authorship on the G7 system. Royalties owed for 5 years of commercial use. And, she paused for the first time, a leadership role, Director of Innovation. A position that, truth be told, should have been yours 5 years ago. Reggie almost laughed. You really think the board will accept a black mechanic from the East Side as their new director? Savannah smiled a rare, calculated smile. They won't have a choice once they understand what's at stake. Dr. Rhodes slid a thick document across the table. This is a confidentiality agreement. Anything we discuss from here stays within this room until we're ready to go public. Before Reggie could respond, a knock echoed on the glass wall. The door burst open. Derek Caldwell again. He didn't wait for permission. Savannah, the board is getting restless. I hope this little detour hasn't. We were discussing the G7 system, Savannah said firmly, not even looking up. Derek glanced at the contract on the table. This again? Why are we giving so much attention to a contract mechanic? Savannah didn't answer him. Instead, she turned her tablet to face Derek. A diagram of the G7 system appeared, with the initials RM tagged on every blueprint. This doesn't prove anything, Derek stammered. He was just an assistant. A minor contributor? Savannah's voice turned icy. Because I also have internal emails from you. Derek emails pushing for Reggie's termination just 3 days after he submitted the finalized G7 design. Derek's mask cracked for just a second before he tried again. We have a board meeting in 10 minutes. We don't have time for conspiracy theories. Savannah stood. I'm placing you on temporary suspension, pending an internal investigation. You can't do that. Derek barked. The board will never. The board will be informed within the hour. Savannah interrupted coldly. And if you care about your dignity, I suggest you leave this office quietly. Derek hesitated. His jaw clenched. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room fell silent again. Savannah turned back to Reggie. We have 2 weeks until the annual shareholders meeting, she said. If we're going to bring this to light, we need irrefutable evidence. Reggie leaned forward slowly. I've got something better. She narrowed her eyes. What? He said it plainly. I have the original prototype, digitally signed, dated, and I have something else. Her pulse visibly quickened. What? He smiled just barely. Recordings. Her eyes widened. Recordings from 5 years ago. Caldwell explaining how to erase my name from the system. Word. For. Word. Savannah glanced at Dr. Rhodes. The attorney's eyebrows lifted in astonishment. How? She asked. I grew up fixing radios and busted TVs in a trailer park where trust was a luxury, Reggie said. So, I learned early. When the world doesn't believe you, keep your own receipts. 6 months later, the executive offices of Lockhart Aviation looked nothing like the old regime. Gone were the rows of identical suits, the backroom smirks, the exclusion masked as standards. In their place, diversity, energy, innovation. At the heart of this transformation stood Reggie Monroe, no longer the mechanic. Now, he was Director of Innovation, leading the very division that had built the G7 pressurization system. The shift hadn't come quietly. It began at a shareholders' meeting that now lived in corporate legend. The entire board had gathered. Cameras lined the back wall. Investors, journalists, and stakeholders filled the room, waiting to hear the company's quarterly progress report. But Savannah Lockhart had other plans. Flanked by Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, she stepped up to the podium and took a long pause. Then she tapped the microphone. "What you're about to hear," she began, "will change this company forever." The lights dimmed. A recording played. It was Derek Caldwell's voice, clear, cold, unmistakable. "We need to erase any trace of that mechanic's authorship. Who's going to believe some black kid from East Clearwater built our flagship system? Our customers trust us, not people like him." The silence that followed wasn't silent at all. It trembled. Gasps. Mutters. Phones lifted to record. The company's stock dropped 18% by the end of the day. But it wasn't a collapse. It was a purge. The evidence, emails, metadata, testimony was undeniable. Reggie Monroe had designed the G7 system. Derek had stolen it. And worse, it was part of a systemic pattern. Over the past decade, 7 other engineers, black, Latino, immigrant, had submitted breakthrough ideas that mysteriously ended up under someone else's name. Reggie could have sued. He could have walked away with millions. But he didn't. Instead, with Savannah's full support, he proposed something bigger. A sweeping internal audit. A compensation program for stolen intellectual property. And the most revolutionary step, the Lockhart Equity Innovation Fund. A $50 million initiative aimed at funding and nurturing talent from historically marginalized communities. "I wasn't after revenge," Reggie told Aviation Weekly in his first public interview. "I was after visibility. Justice isn't just about clearing your name. It's about tearing down the system that silenced it in the first place." Derek Caldwell? Disgraced. Disbarred from the engineering board. Sued by both Lockhart Aviation and federal agencies. Last anyone heard, he was applying to be a consultant for third-tier suppliers who didn't mind burned bridges. Meanwhile, Reggie was building more than systems. He had opened the Monroe Center for Innovation, a state-of-the-art lab in his old neighborhood. There, kids who once only saw planes from behind chain-link fences were now designing components that might one day fly on them. At the grand opening, Savannah Lockhart stood beside him. She looked out at the crowd, board members, city officials, and dozens of students from underrepresented backgrounds, and said, "1 year ago, many of you saw a black man mocked while saving lives. Today, that same man is saving an industry." Reggie scanned the audience. Some faces looked familiar, those who once smirked now clapped. But he didn't smile for them. He smiled for the kids in the front row, the ones with oil on their hands, brilliance in their minds, and no idea what the word limit used to mean. The banners read, "Fueling dreams, not just engines." 1 year had passed since Reggie Monroe walked onto a private runway and was laughed at for how he looked. 1 year since he uncovered a hidden empire of theft and discrimination. Today, the building standing behind him, the Monroe Center for Innovation, was more than bricks and glass. It was a declaration. Inside, dozens of students buzzed around prototypes, some barely out of high school. Others were single moms, veterans, or formerly incarcerated men, people who had been told no by the world, but were finally hearing yes from opportunity. And it was working. 3 patents had already emerged from the program, technologies so advanced they were being reviewed by NASA and Boeing. Reggie stood at the podium, flanked by Savannah Lockhart and Dr. Evelyn Rhodes. Behind them, a giant screen projected the schematics of Lockhart Aviation's latest breakthrough, a propulsion system that cut fuel usage by 40%. Developed entirely under Reggie's leadership. Savannah stepped up first. "A year ago, this man was mocked while saving lives," she told the crowd. "Today, he's saving the planet. And more importantly, he's saving dreams, the ones we almost lost to prejudice." The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Reggie stepped forward, pausing as his eyes scanned the front row. There, sitting quietly, was the woman who had made all of this possible for him, not Savannah. His mother, Miss Loretta Monroe, 72, wearing her Sunday best and holding a tissue in her trembling hands. She had cleaned offices her entire life so her son could go to school. And now, that same boy, once escorted out of a corporate building in disgrace, was changing the very foundations of that world. Reggie took a breath and spoke. "Justice isn't when people like me get through the door," he said. "It's when we remove the door altogether." It's when we make sure the next generation doesn't have to survive what we endured just to be seen. He paused. I didn't win. We did. He looked back at Savannah and nodded. She smiled not like a CEO, but like an ally. But what stunned the corporate world even more than Reggie's rise was what came next. 3 months after that event, Savannah Lockhart held a press conference. Everyone expected a new product reveal. Instead, she made an announcement that sent shockwaves across the aerospace industry. Lockhart Aviation was merging with Monroe Engineering Group. That small business Reggie had kept alive in his garage during his years of silence. It now owned 30% of the most powerful aerospace firm in the southeastern United States. It wasn't a partnership for headlines. It was structural power, shared leadership, real ownership. The executives who had mocked him on the runway were either gone or learning to answer to him. And for those who asked whether it was just a PR stunt, Reggie had one answer. Prejudice is expensive, he said during a segment on Good Morning America. But inclusion? That's what makes us fly higher than we ever imagined. Across the country, other companies followed suit. Similar equity funds were launched. Innovation centers popped up in communities that had never seen a tech investment. And young people who had once believed the skies were closed to them were now building the engines to fly through them. Reggie's face became a symbol, not just of success, but of transformation. But he never let it go to his head. Instead, every morning, he walked into the Monroe Center and greeted every student by name. He told them stories not of racism or revenge, but of resistance and rebuilding. And whenever a student asked how he made it, he would always reply, I didn't. We're still making it. Together. Because the greatest legacy Reggie Monroe left behind wasn't a system or a title. It was the idea that dignity, when defended with courage, becomes a blueprint others can build on. The story of Reggie Monroe isn't just about one man's redemption, it's a mirror reflecting what countless voices have endured in silence. It teaches us that true talent often hides in plain sight, buried beneath bias, dismissed by assumption, and erased by those who fear being outshined. But when injustice is met with patience, proof, and unshakable integrity, even the most impenetrable walls can fall. This isn't just a story of racism, it's a blueprint for how truth, when backed by evidence and courage, can reshape entire industries. The lesson? Never underestimate the quiet ones. And never let credentials blind you to character. Inclusion isn't charity, it's smart business. Reggie's innovations saved lives, created jobs, and redefined what leadership looks like. Just imagine how much progress we're losing every day by ignoring voices like his. So here's your moment. If this story moved, you don't just scroll. Share it. Start a conversation. Tag someone who needs to see it. And most importantly, subscribe now to follow more true stories where justice isn't just preached, it's engineered. Because when we lift one unheard voice, we amplify 1,000 more. And if this story has stirred something in you, if it reminded you that talent has no color and justice has no timeline, then don't just watch.